This is episode 114 of the Trauma Coaching for Latter-day Saints podcast. Does everyone have trauma? I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a Latter-day Saint mom with a history of trauma. I've figured out how to heal my trauma, and I can help you do the same. Why? Because trauma is one obstacle to gathering Zion. Let's talk about what it takes to truly heal and find lasting joy. Okay, this is a question that I get all the time. Pretty much anytime I talk about how I define trauma or just trauma in general, I'll start talking about trauma and then someone will say, "What is trauma exactly?" And then I will explain to them. And then they will say, "But wait, so does that mean that everyone has trauma?" So, just a little recap, or if you're new, a little overview of the definition of trauma, according to how I think about it. Trauma is any unresolved autonomic nervous system response. So, that autonomic nervous system is that fight, flight, or freeze response. It often looks like emotion that we never got to process. Maybe there wasn't time to process it, or there wasn't support to be able to process it. There's a reason why certain experiences or emotions become trauma because they are too overwhelming for us to handle on our own. So our body wisely shuts it down, preventing our own pain and death. Remember also that trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens on the inside of you when something happens on the outside of you that felt too big for you to handle. When we don't have enough support or resources on the inside, internal support and resources, the energy of the painful emotions has to go somewhere. So it gets packaged up, so to speak, and put away. And that is basically the freeze response, which is one of the requirements for trauma. So, does everyone have trauma? Most likely, yes. It's very likely, very, 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 very likely that every person on earth has experienced something in which their internal resources were not enough, right? Because we've all experienced something scary and overwhelming to us, right? So, also remember, maybe I should have said this, that trauma happens when there's a perceived threat that we can't get away from and we can't fight, right? So then we have to shut down the resources, all of the activation that was put into our body to run away or to fight. It has to just shut down. And that's what trauma is. And if we don't ever have support, and support can look a lot of different ways, but if we don't ever have support to finish that energy cycle, then it's likely to turn into trauma. But so that's the first answer to the question, does everyone have trauma? I think what people are really thinking when they ask that question is, so should everyone go deal with their trauma? So it's probably true that most every human on the planet has some form of trauma. And, I could be wrong about that. There could be some humans who have never experienced a perceived threat that went all the way to a freeze response, which is why I say most likely. But being human, most of us have experiences that would lead to trauma in some way. Does it mean that everyone should resolve their trauma? And my answer is no. And here's why. Just like everything else in life, we should take action based on where we want to go. So let's use an example here. I live in Denver. If I want to go visit family in Atlanta, there are several ways to get there. How do I know how to get there? Well, today we've got maps and the internet and all of that, right? But how do I not get lost and somehow end up in New York City, right? If I'm on a road trip and my destination from Denver is Atlanta, then anytime I take a turn or, a new road or whatever, I'm going to want to make sure that it's pointing me in the direction of Atlanta. Now, let's say that on the way to Atlanta, I'm going to mosey my way and I'm going to check out the sights, and it's going to be like a very adventurous trip, but I still want to end up in Atlanta. It's possible that I could go a few hours away from Denver and then be like, oh, hey, here's this site. We should go there. And we have to drive 10 minutes out of the way to go check out that museum or whatever it is. And then when we get back onto our original route that we've decided we're taking to get to Atlanta, it's possible we could be like, oh, but now let's go over here. Let's go over there. Right. So when we're talking about trauma and trauma resolution, it's important to remember why we're doing it. And that's why I say not everyone needs to resolve their trauma. There are lots of people in the world that probably have lots of trauma that's unresolved, affecting their lives, and they have no desire to resolve it for whatever reason, right? So I don't think it's important to resolve your trauma. I think you can manage to cope and live a fabulous life unless trauma and its effects on you are creating an obstacle to the destination you want to end up at, right? So you can see how in this road trip analogy, if we allow ourselves to go wherever we want without the destination, we could end up anywhere, right? So, and this is how some people live their lives. They don't necessarily have a destination, which is fine, unless they get to the point where they're like, this isn't what I want out of my life. I wanted this other thing. What went wrong? Right. And so bringing it back to trauma, you really only need to resolve your trauma, work on your trauma, do the work of your trauma if it's getting in your way in some way. Your body is really good at taking care of you. You may not need to resolve your trauma. You might feel like your life is pretty good, that your relationships are solid, you're reaching goals. Maybe you don't need to do anything other than what you've been doing. But if you have a goal or you feel like something in your life is missing and you realize that trauma is the thing getting in the way, then you might want to resolve your trauma in order to get where you want to go. I was on a call the other day with a group of women who want to become coaches. And because I have a few years experience, I by no means think I am the most experienced person and have all the answers. A couple of these ladies had reached out to me on Voxer, which, by the way, you're totally welcome to reach out to me on Voxer. I'm at Danita Bremer. And they were just asking me questions. They were like, oh, we heard you went through the life coach school and we have questions. And so I was just happy to answer their questions back and forth for several days. And then I said, if you want me to come into this group that you have, I'm happy to come and answer questions. I mean, I'm not like the absolute truth on coaching or anything, but I do have some experience and I'm happy to be helpful in any way. And so they were like, oh my gosh, that would be so great. Well, through the course of this call, I answered a whole bunch of questions and then I did a coaching demo. And one of the ladies spoke up and she said, well, when I watched you coached, it felt really confrontational to me. And it just felt like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm going to have to do that if I'm a coach. So I assured her that she could most likely be an amazing coach, even if she didn't have a style that was similar to mine. We talked about what it means to be confrontational. The person I coached, I asked if she felt like it was confrontational. She said, no, not at all. But this is super fascinating to hear somebody else's take on it. And I asked this sweet woman a few questions. And I said, it sounds like trauma to me. It sounds like there's some wound there that's really sensitive that might prevent you from being able to be the coach that you want to be, if that's what you really want. And so I would really suggest that you work with someone to get that resolved. In no way am I expecting her to work with me, or is that my intention? it just felt like if what she wanted was to become a coach and to um, guide and mentor and help other people through some of their struggles. And when she thought of coaching, she's having this like, oh, I can't do that. That feel like it has to be confrontational. That right away there's an obstacle there, right? Now, I even said if you want to be a coach that creates courses and maybe you don't work one on one with people, maybe you won't have to work on that trauma, right? It's just like if you want to be one on one and this feels like problematic to you, then you might want to work on that first before you go too far into coaching and like practicing and getting clients and all of that. So that was a good example of how I wouldn't necessarily give that advice to everyone, but for that person, it felt like this might get in the way a little bit. So, do we all have trauma? Most likely. Do we all need to resolve our trauma? Probably not, right? I will say resolving your trauma is for people who have a destination they want to get to, and they also have an obstacle that they haven't been able to figure out yet. It's likely that if an external solution hasn't helped yet, then it's really an internal solution that is needed. And in my mind, I definitely could be wrong, there are only two types of internal problems there is how you think and how you feel. And really, they are both really how you feel. It's really only one kind of problem because the only problem with how you think is because of how it makes you feel, right? Or how it makes you show up in the world and makes other people feel, perhaps, which is just a different kind of work, right? So, how would you know if trauma specifically is the answer? So, first of all, because I know a lot of you that listen to me are probably well versed in mindset type of coaching. If mindset work doesn't work for you, or it doesn't kind of move the needle in all the areas, because in my experience, mindset work has been fabulous and it has helped me in so many ways, but it didn't move the needle in some really profound ways, right? So if mindset work wasn't as helpful as you wanted it to be, and it is plenty helpful for many, many people, then it's likely that nervous system regulation and trauma work is what you need. Or another way to think about this is if you experience chronic stress, and I'm really focused on the chronic here, not just like a stressful situation that was temporary, right? Because we need stress. Lots of stress is healthy stress, but chronic stress or always feeling overwhelmed or always feeling burnt out, these are some clues because these are all chronic symptoms that point toward a lack of internal resources or support. Also, if you struggle with some kind of addiction or perfectionism, and I'm realizing I should probably do an episode on perfectionism. Addiction and perfectionism are things that we can see on the outside. We can notice ourselves constantly being on our phones or always grabbing for the chocolate. Listen, I'm right there with you. We can notice ourselves, obviously, like if we're shooting heroin or smoking cigarettes or something like that. It's probably not you. It's not my main target audience, right? But those are very noticeable on the outside. And perfectionism can be noticeable on the outside too. We can hear ourselves berating ourselves or saying like you just didn't do good enough or having that sort of energy of like I've got to prove myself, right? That sort of hustle on the outside. That's probably what I would look for is this hustle, like I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to always be on time and I have to always do it right, right? I have a kiddo who's very much like me who experiences this. He gets very stressed when he's not on time, when he recently lost his math book. And I think that really stressed him out. And I, tried to offer my help and support. He found it. And then he would say, like, oh, I know what to do if you don't want to feel stressed. Find your math book. Kind of funny, but Perfectionism. It's not that you are perfect all the time. If you struggle with perfectionism, it's that you're always striving to be perfect in some way. Or you could think of it as you're always trying to prove yourself, right? And addiction and perfectionism are two things that point towards something missing, some lack of support or resources in our identities, that they really point more toward like a developmental trauma. Okay. So, does everyone have trauma? Probably. Does everyone need to fix their trauma? Nope. So, I hope this has been helpful. Um, Journaling questions. I think these questions will be really clarifying. What is your destination? Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? What do you want out of your life? That's kind of the question. What's your destination? And destination is, theoretical or not a physical destination necessarily. Maybe you're like, I want to live in Hawaii. Maybe that's your destination. Or maybe you're like, I want to be super financially successful. Or maybe your destination is, I want to feel really connected to my kids even when they're adults. Whatever it is you want in your life. And does it feel like trauma or unresolved emotion is getting in the way? And why or why not? That is going to be the most clarifying of the questions, right? If you would like help with these questions, if you want to kind of figure out, is it trauma or is it not trauma? I'm happy to do a free session with you. So go to my website and click on the free session button that will come up. And let's just chat. Let's just have a conversation about whether what you're struggling with could be trauma or not. It's not an exact science, right? There are like certain markers that point us in the right direction. So if you need help with that, I'd be happy to help. All right. You guys, I am so thrilled to announce that I am currently fully booked with private clients. Now, that won't always be the case because clients are constantly coming in and out, right? So if you want to work with me on a one-on-one basis, I really encourage you to get on a free call and to see if you even feel safe with me. I call these safety calls or trauma assessment calls. That's the first step. I don't even want to talk about like, how long is this? How much does it cost? How often do we meet? All of those things until you are sure that working with me feels safe and it feels right. Because that's important when we're working with trauma, because trauma is born out of situations where we don't feel safe and we don't feel right. And because the sooner you get in the door to a free session, the sooner you can get on a waiting list and get in the door to working with me. So I really encourage that. In the meantime, I'm for sure going to continue to put out information here that I think will be helpful to you. If you have questions, this episode is based out of a question that I get all the time from people. Do you have a question for me that could become a podcast episode? It doesn't have to be specifically on trauma. It could be about anything that you're curious about. I would love to hear your questions and respond to them if it feels appropriate for this podcast. Of course, I will respond to them to you directly, even if it doesn't feel appropriate for the podcast. But I also want to invite you to come check out Presence. Presence is my group experience where I want to get some of the tools and teachings and the things that I've been learning about how to heal trauma into your hands. I feel like, at least for me, in my experience, this journey has been sort of a long and winding journey. And it felt like it took me a while to figure out, like, oh, this is the thing. And I understand if it feels a little bit scary. One thing I want to say is when you're working with trauma, you don't have to talk about the thing that happened in the past. What we work with is whatever is happening with you right now in the current moment. So, if you're interested in learning how to regulate your nervous system, tools to help you be more present, and you want to actually experience some of the fruit of this work of feeling more joyful, more relaxed, less urgent, less stress, of course, I really invite you to come check out Presence. It may or may not be the thing for you, but it won't hurt to check it out. So go to danitabremmer.com/presence, Presence, not like presents like Christmas gifts, right? The presence, the essence of your being. And check out what I have there. It's not only for people that have trauma or struggle with trauma, although if you do, it certainly will be a helpful experience. It's really for anyone who would like to coach with me, would like to have more of somatic based, body based. Let's move our bodies. Let's breathe. Let's do this, do that. Try pushing away like some of these things that we still get to do over Zoom. And maybe you want to work with me. Maybe you just haven't found a way. Maybe you have things in your life you would like to resolve. I believe, and this is coming from a person who has done mindset work for 5 years, I believe the somatic work is actually the shorter path to healing and just to whatever it is you want in your life. Right. So I really encourage you to come check out Presence. So far, we have 5 people in there, and our first call is next week. I am getting super excited. So if you're interested, danitabremmer.com/presence. That's enough for now. And so are you. The impact I am making in the world grows best by word of mouth. Would you please share this episode with someone this week? And if you're ready to address your own trauma with my support, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free trauma assessment call. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.